The restaurant glowed in soft amber light, the kind that made everything seem a little more magical than it really was. Crystal glasses sparkled, faint piano music danced through the air, and laughter rippled from well-dressed tables filled with executives, couples, and dreamers. At one corner table sat her Evelyn Hart, the kind of woman who could silence a room with her presence. She was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company, known for her sharp mind, flawless grace, and the quiet loneliness she hid behind her confident smile. Tonight, she had finally agreed to something she'd never done before: a blind date. Her friends had baited her to try it. Just one dinner, they said. You might actually meet someone who sees you, not just the CEO. She adjusted her diamond bracelet nervously, watching the door. The man she was supposed to meet would arrive at 7:30. It was already 7:40. The restaurant's candlelight flickered against her elegant face as she sighed, wondering if this had been a mistake. But at that very moment, across the street, a man named Daniel Brooks was rushing toward the restaurant, clutching a cheap bouquet of daisies. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his shoes were clean but clearly worn. He wasn't supposed to be here tonight, at least not for dinner. Daniel was a janitor at the same restaurant, finishing an early shift before heading home. But fate had other plans. He had overheard his coworkers gossiping earlier that day about a woman waiting for her blind date in the restaurant. Out of curiosity, he peeked into the dining room just as he was about to leave and then froze. There she was, sitting alone, her eyes carrying a softness that didn't match her powerful aura. Something about her expression, the quiet hope, the vulnerability, made him pause. And that's when the confusion began. A waiter who knew Daniel waved him over. "There you are. Your table's ready," he said hurriedly, assuming Daniel was the late arrival for Evelyn's blind date. Daniel tried to explain, but the waiter was already leading him forward. Nervous and bewildered, Daniel found himself seated across from the most stunning woman he had ever seen in his life. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unexpected connections, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this one to life. Evelyn looked up, her disappointment shifting into surprise as she met Daniel's nervous smile. He looked nothing like the man she had imagined. His clothes weren't expensive, his hair was slightly messy, and he seemed utterly lost. But there was something genuine in his eyes, something kind. Daniel swallowed hard, trying not to stare at her too long. He didn't know how to act. This was clearly a mistake, but she didn't seem angry. Instead, she smiled faintly, and something in her tone softened as she said hello. He stammered a greeting, his hands trembling under the table. When the waiter poured wine, Daniel reached for his glass with such care that it made Evelyn smile wider than she had in weeks. Minutes turned into half an hour. They talked, well, tried to. Daniel was honest from the start. He told her he worked as a janitor nearby and had no idea how he ended up at her table. He expected her to laugh, maybe even leave, but instead, she tilted her head thoughtfully, then said that maybe fate had wanted her to meet someone real for once. Something inside her shifted that evening. Evelyn had spent years surrounded by polished people, men in tailored suits, conversations filled with ambition and ego. But Daniel's words were simple, pure. He spoke about his late mother, who had taught him that no job was small if done with heart. He talked about dreams he'd given up when life got hard, about working night shifts to support his younger sister's education. Every sentence carried sincerity that money couldn't buy. As she listened, Evelyn felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. For once, she didn't have to impress anyone. She could just be herself. Meanwhile, Daniel couldn't believe any of this was real. Every time she laughed, he felt lighter, and yet guilt tugged at him. He wasn't supposed to be sitting here. She deserved someone far above his world. When the real blind date finally arrived almost an hour late, Daniel stood up immediately, his face flushing with embarrassment. The other man was tall, sleek, and arrogant. When he realized Daniel had been sitting with Evelyn, he scoffed, whispering something cruel about staff under his breath. Daniel apologized and started to leave, but before he could, Evelyn placed her hand gently on his wrist and looked up. Her eyes, sharp moments ago, now softened again. She thanked Daniel for the conversation, for making her evening unexpectedly meaningful. That night, when Daniel walked home under the streetlights, he smiled to himself for the first time in weeks. He had nothing, no fancy job, no money, but he had shared laughter with someone who, in another world, would have never noticed him. Days passed, and he thought that was the end. But fate had one more twist. A week later, as Daniel was mopping the marble floors in the restaurant's lobby, he heard a familiar voice call his name. He looked up, and there she was, Evelyn Hart, standing in a crisp white blazer, holding a coffee in one hand, her eyes glowing with amusement. She told him she hadn't been able to forget that night. She had realized that the world was full of people pretending to be perfect, but very few who were real. And Daniel was real. He couldn't speak. The other staff stared in shock as the CEO of one of the city's biggest corporations chatted warmly with a janitor. She asked if he'd join her for coffee this time, intentionally. Hesitant but deeply moved, he agreed. Over the next few months, their paths began to cross more often. Evelyn found excuses to visit the restaurant. Daniel, though still humble and reserved, began to open up more around her. They shared stories of struggles, hers of being a woman constantly underestimated in a ruthless corporate world, his of fighting every day to survive but never letting bitterness win. Their friendship grew quietly, like a flower blooming in a place no one expected. Still, Daniel's insecurities ran deep. He often avoided her calls, afraid people would talk, afraid she'd be judged for being seen with him. He couldn't bear to be the reason her reputation suffered. But Evelyn saw beyond all that. She saw his heart, the honesty, the humility, and the quiet strength he carried. One evening, she visited his small apartment after learning that his sister had been hospitalized. She sat with him in silence, helping him fill out paperwork, comforting him when he broke down. That night, Daniel realized that Evelyn didn't see him as less than anyone else. She saw him as someone worth standing beside. When his sister recovered, Evelyn offered to sponsor her education, but Daniel refused politely. He didn't want charity. He wanted to build his life on his own. That made her respect him even more. Months turned into a year. Daniel found a new job, this time in building maintenance at Evelyn's company headquarters. She didn't hire him directly. He applied through a contractor. Still, every time they crossed paths in the hallway, she'd flash him a smile that made his day brighter. Employees whispered, wondering why the CEO always seemed so kind to that one janitor, but Evelyn didn't care. Then, one winter evening, as snowflakes danced outside the tall glass windows of the company building, Daniel found her alone in the office cafeteria. She looked tired, her head resting on her hands, the weight of leadership pressing hard. Without saying anything, he placed a steaming cup of coffee beside her the same way she had done for him months ago. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither said a word. It wasn't romance that connected them, it was understanding. Two souls from different worlds, sharing something real in a world that was anything but. Evelyn smiled softly. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. He laughed quietly. "Every day," he said. Their story never turned into a typical fairy tale. There were no grand declarations or diamond rings, just two people who changed each other's lives in quiet, beautiful ways. Daniel never stopped being humble, and Evelyn never stopped being human. He reminded her that success meant nothing without kindness. She reminded him that worth wasn't measured by titles or money, but by how much heart someone carried. Years later, when Evelyn's company started a new scholarship program for underprivileged youth, she named it the Brooks Initiative, inspired by the man who taught her what real strength looked like. Daniel attended the launch ceremony, standing quietly at the back, watching her speak on stage. When their eyes met across the crowd, she smiled the same warm smile she had given him on that first night, when everything went wrong, but somehow it all went right. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your one click helps spread stories that remind us the world still has goodness in it. Speech balloon special request: comment below what you would have done if you were in Evelyn's place. Would you have stayed and listened, or walked away? As the lights dimmed and applause filled the hall, Daniel slipped out quietly, his heart full. He had no riches, no fame, but he had been part of something rare, a connection that defied everything society expected. And as Evelyn stood on stage, she realized that the greatest accident of her life had been the moment a janitor sat at the wrong table and made her believe in love, humility, and second chances once again.